Welcome back to the Wolf of Property and Casualty. I'm your host, Derek Lasniak, with over 15 years of commercial broking experience focused on the middle market, upper middle market, and national account space. Welcome back to our series called Commissions to Convictions, my personal journey from the pinnacles of sales success in property and casualty sales down to the bottom that ultimately led to incarceration, substance abuse, and legal challenges. And my ability to talk about that story and to be vulnerable and to provide context on the things that I've learned. Because as I've said before, I don't believe that I ever could have appreciated both parts of my journey unless I had gone through both of them. And the topic for today is acting. And when I say acting, I'm not talking about probably what a lot of people maybe think about me who have known me over the last 5, 10 years. The acting that comes to mind is deceitful and lies and secrets. And that's not the acting I'm talking about, though. I'm talking about a different kind of acting, an acting that, when I reflect back on my journey in sales, was critical. There are subtle things that I think made me incredibly good at what I did. And when I keep coming back to it, I come back to this idea of acting. So put aside what you think about when someone says that person's just putting on a show or they're full of shit or they're acting. I'm not talking about that. Everybody's got to have their own bullshit meter. Everyone's got to be able to pick up on what's bullshit. But what I'm talking about is acting as a profession. I'm a movie buff. I always have been. To me, there's nothing better than a nice cold theater or a great flick. I do have an appreciation for that craft. I'm not so sure that I would ever be an actor, but I respect that that is a profession. Those people aren't bad people, those actors. They're not liars. They're not manipulators. They're performing. They're acting. And one of the things that I think gets maybe lost is the subtle ability to treat your sales job like an act. And that means that you have to treat that profession the same way that actors do, which means learning lines, which means maybe at times adopting method acting, acting a certain way. The new movie that's coming out this summer that everyone's talking about is the new Christopher Nolan flick. It's called The Odyssey. And some of the actors are being interviewed right now, and they're talking about this incredible journey because Christopher Nolan doesn't like to use green screens, and they traveled the world, $250 million budget. They're hiking up mountains. They're in the fucking ocean on a real boat. These people aren't doing it because they're full of shit. They're doing it because they're acting and they're dedicating themselves. They're learning lines in Sideways Win. And I think it requires thinking about your job as a sales professional, especially in property and casualty sales, where you're selling people a lot of intangible product that costs a lot of money, especially in the middle market, upper middle market space, and you're only getting 12, 15 hours with the potential buyer. That's like an actor who has 2 hours on screen to convince you that something is worth your attention. And so acting is a part of sales, and I became very good at it. A couple of examples of what the kind of acting I was talking about. And the acting requires you to know your audience. You'll hear actors talk about this. And nothing is more important than knowing your audience when you're in sales. I did business all over the state of Wisconsin, and I am a Wisconsin sports fan. But I a lot of business in the Green Bay region, which for those of you outside of Wisconsin, that's kind of the finger that points out. And Green Bay is, of course, home to the Green Bay Packers. I was a Packer fan. I kept track of the games, but my life was always busy. I had a little kid. I had other responsibilities. But I knew that whenever I went to visit one of my four very large Green Bay accounts, I knew that I had to learn my lines before those meetings. It's not just who won the game. It's what's the injury report? What's going on with Aaron Rodgers? What's the rumor mill? And I had a series of places that I would check. I knew ahead of that meeting that there was going to be some small talk somewhere and that it was going to make my customers feel at ease if we could chit chat about the Packers and I knew what was going on with the Packers. Yes, I had an interest in the Packers. Was I going to dig through Twitter and find out what the injury report was for so and so, or what the trade rumor was, or why the offensive line looked like shit? I maybe wouldn't have gone that far on any other day, but when I went to Green Bay, I did. I learned my lines. Likewise, I had jokes and I had certain language that I would use. Some people I found in my career are disarmed if you cuss a little bit. You can't be dropping F-bombs all over the place, but if you swear for emphasis and you have the right audience, that disarms them a little bit. I used to have this really crappy joke and I kind of tweaked it over the years. But when I was talking, especially in the last couple of years, about the hard market in the auto liability realm. And I talked about why, auto liability rates were rising due to nuclear verdicts and the need for increased umbrella to the extent that you can afford it. They would say, well, what's the worst case scenario? And I would always say, well, we're talking about a nuclear verdict. So that means when one of your drivers, after 2 drinks, is on their cell phone, crosses the center line, and barrels into a school bus full of lawyers' kids. That joke is funny. And that joke can really land for emphasis on how limits can be deployed to settle lawsuits. But that joke's not for everybody. That joke's not for my large law firm client in Milwaukee who does personal injury that tries those cases. But I'm acting. I'm acting. I know that someone who is a certain way is going to find humor in that joke and it's also going to land. But I'm not whipping that joke out in front of my law firm client. So again, I'm acting. I'm not being dishonest with myself. I believe all those things. I'm interested in the Packers. I do think that that joke is funny, but I'm deploying it. I'm learning my lines for that day. And I think if this analogy helps, you can give it some thought before you're going to meetings. What is the character that I'm playing for this group? It doesn't need to deviate far from who I am as a real person, but it does need to be on character and it needs to be consistent and the lines need to be well thought out. You don't have to win an Oscar. There's no other time in my life when I had to have my act straight is when I walked out of the courtroom knowing that I was going to spend a few months in jail. Worse yet, I didn't have any experience. This wasn't who's the starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. This wasn't a kind of corny joke about a school bus full of lawyers' kids. This was me having to act in a situation I never thought I'd be in a place I can't imagine ever being in, scared to death. And I had to decide in a moment's notice what my act was going to be. What were my lines going to be? How was I going to keep these lines consistent over 3 months while I'm scared to death away from my family and loved ones and not knowing what to do? I leaned on the years and years and years I had putting my characters together for my clients. I knew how to be consistent. I knew how to make sure that what I was saying was truly who I was, even if it was polished a little bit, to make sure that I remained safe, to make sure that I had people to talk to make sure I didn't live in isolation. And those years of acting in a professional sales career allowed me to develop my character, allowed me at times to find happiness and to find peace and contentness with the miserable situation I found myself in. It allowed me to play the character around a lot of people who were not like me, to say reluctant and ashamed and embarrassed husband and dedicated father who lost his way and had some resources and could help people and was a good writer and could help people write letters. And over the course of the very first couple of weeks in jail, as I met the people who I shared this dorm-like environment with, I learned my lines and I said them and I was consistent. And I had the benefit of actually believing the things that I was saying, but I stayed on that message. I didn't deviate with throwing an outlandish joke that I knew wouldn't land with the people I was sitting and having dinner with. I acted and I was comfortable with my lines, and my ability to do that day in and day out allowed me to have peace and allowed me to have the clarity and the mindset to really think about what all the judges hope you do when you find yourself in jail. Think about what got you there and how it's going to be different. And because my act was rehearsed, and because I had years of experience putting my characters together for my customers, it allowed me to be successful in the worst situation possible. So this is a reminder out there. It's not about being deceitful. It's not about being manipulative. It's not about being a liar, but it is about acting. And if you think about your acting as a true profession, just like the ones that you go to the movies and check out, not only can it bring you tremendous success and disarm and make your clients comfortable, but who knows, you might draw on that in your own personal situation at a time of need.